I still remember the moment my dad asked that question. It was such a simple question, a gentle one, something any parent might ask their child on an ordinary day. But when he looked at me with those tired eyes and quietly said, "Where's your car?" I felt something inside me break quietly, silently, like a glass touched by a soft vibration. Welcome to Stories by Amy. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Now, let's jump back into my story. I'm sure you'll love it if you keep listening till the end. I stood there in the doorway of my parents' home, holding my small handbag like it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. My clothes were slightly wet because it had been drizzling all the way from the bus stop, and strands of my hair clung to my cheeks. I must have looked like someone who had come a long way, not just in distance, but in life. I wanted to smile and pretend everything was fine. I wanted to say, "Oh, it's at the mechanic," or "I left it with my husband," or something simple that would end the conversation right there. But the truth was sitting too heavily on my chest. I had been hiding it for months, carrying it alone like a quiet weight no one could see. My dad stepped a little closer, his voice softer now. "Why did you come by bus, dear? What happened to your car?" And that was the moment, the exact second, when all the walls I had been holding up just dissolved. I didn't break down dramatically. There were no loud sobs or tears running down my face. It was quieter than that, more painful because it was so quiet. My voice came out small, almost like it belonged to a different version of me. I whispered, "Dad, I didn't want to, but my husband and his mom, they were pressuring me. They kept saying the car was too much for me, that I should give it up, that I didn't need it anymore." I saw the confusion on his face first, then concern. Then something deeper, the kind of worry only a parent feels when they realize their child has been hurting in ways they never noticed. He didn't ask more questions. Not right away. Instead, he led me inside, gently touching my shoulder like he used to when I was a child who had scraped her knee. The house smelled like tea and old books. It always did. It was the smell of comfort, the smell of a home where nothing bad could happen. I sat on the sofa, feeling the warmth of the room slowly wrap around me, and for the first time in a long time I felt safe enough to breathe. But that safety also made the truth rise up inside me, the way a hidden wound stings when someone finally touches it with care. My dad sat across from me, elbows on his knees, hands clasped, waiting. He didn't push me. He didn't rush me. He just waited. And sometimes, someone waiting kindly is enough to open every locked door inside you. I looked at him, and my voice trembled as I spoke again. They kept telling me I didn't deserve it, that I wasn't responsible enough, that a woman like me didn't need a car. His mother, she kept saying a daughter-in-law should adjust. That independence makes a woman stubborn, that I should let the family decide what's best for me. Each word felt like stepping into a memory I had been avoiding. Memories of conversations that felt like knives wrapped in polite smiles. Memories of slowly shrinking myself because I thought keeping peace meant keeping quiet. My dad, he closed his eyes for a moment when he heard that, not out of anger, but because he was trying to absorb the pain I had been carrying alone. And then he opened them again, soft but steady. "Tell me everything," he said. "Start from the beginning, I'm listening." And that one sentence, that simple sentence, made me realize how long it had been since someone had truly listened to me, not judged me, not talked over me, not decided things for me, just listened. So I took a slow breath. I looked at my hands resting in my lap, and with a quiet heart and a tired soul, I began to tell the story of how the life I thought I was building slowly turned into a place where I felt smaller with each passing day. And it all began long before the car disappeared from my life, long before that simple question at the door. It began with love, with trust, with hope, things that should never hurt. But sometimes they do. When I look back at everything now, it's almost strange how quietly life can change. Nothing dramatic, no loud warning, just small moments, tiny choices, gentle shifts in the way someone speaks or behaves. You don't notice them right away. You just go along with life, believing everything is normal. I used to think my life was normal. Warm, simple, predictable in the way everyday life often is. Before marriage, I lived a life that was quietly peaceful. Not perfect, but steady. I worked at a small office not too far from home. My colleagues were friendly, the kind who shared biscuits during tea breaks and complained about the air conditioner being too cold. We weren't close, but we cared for each other in the simple ways that matter. My parents were my safe place. We didn't talk deeply every day, but our bond was strong in the quiet way families sometimes have built on shared meals, soft reminders, and the comfort of knowing someone is there even if they aren't saying much. My dad especially, he was never loud, never strict, never one to make big speeches. But there was a gentleness in him that shaped my whole childhood. He used to knock on my room door even when it was half open. He used to leave an extra fruit in my lunch box even when I told him not to. He used to put a blanket over me when I fell asleep on the sofa after a long day, pretending he didn't do it so I wouldn't tease him. It's things like that, small things, that you miss the most when life becomes heavy. When I first met my husband, I believed I had found someone who had that same gentleness in him. He wasn't overly charming or dramatic. He wasn't the kind who swept me off my feet with big gestures. Instead, he was calm, soft-spoken, almost shy. We met through a mutual friend, and our first conversation was about our favorite foods. Simple things, comfortable things. He asked what I liked to cook. I said I wasn't very good at cooking but loved trying. He laughed gently and said, "That's okay, I burn tea sometimes." I remember smiling at that. I remember thinking he was sincere, the kind of man who wouldn't hurt anyone intentionally. Our courtship wasn't long, but it felt warm and honest. He would message me every morning just to ask if I'd eaten. He would wait with me at the bus stop whenever we met near my office. He spoke kindly, listened patiently, and treated me with a softness that made me feel safe. When he proposed marriage, I said yes because I truly believed I would be entering a home that valued gentleness the way I did. I didn't know then how different the world inside someone's home can be from the world they show outside. My mother-in-law was a woman with an elegant presence. Tall, graceful, always dressed neatly even on ordinary days. She spoke softly, but there was a firmness hidden under her gentleness, a firmness I did not understand in the beginning. On our first meeting, she smiled at me with warm eyes and said, "You look like someone who knows how to take care of a home." I didn't give much thought to the sentence then. I assumed it was a compliment or maybe just a polite way of making conversation. But later, I would realize those words weren't just an observation. They were an expectation, a quiet rule, a guideline for the life she imagined for her daughter-in-law. My dad liked my husband instantly. He said he seemed humble and sincere. My mom said he looked like the kind of son-in-law who would take care of me. I wanted to believe that too. For a while I did. Our wedding was simple, filled with soft lights and smiling faces. People said we made a beautiful couple. My husband held my hand gently that day, making me feel like the future ahead of us was bright and calm. If someone had told me that a few years later I would be standing in my parents' doorway without my car, without my smile, and without the confidence I once had, I would not have believed it. The first few months of our marriage were peaceful. Almost too peaceful. My husband was still quiet, still gentle, still the soft-spoken man I married, but he also started to change in ways that were easy to overlook. He began asking for my opinions less and less. At first, it was subtle. "What do you want to eat?" turned into "Mom already cooked something." "Do you want to go out?" turned into "Mom wants us to stay home today." "Should we buy something for the house?" turned into "Mom thinks it's unnecessary." Each time, his tone was calm, polite, almost reassuring, and I didn't want to seem controlling or difficult, so I went along with it. After all, it was his mother, and she had welcomed me warmly. I wanted to respect her. I wanted to be a good daughter-in-law. But over time, the warmth in her smile began to feel colder. Not openly cold, but measured. Calculated. Like her politeness wasn't kindness, but a careful mask she wore when others were around. She would say things in the sweetest voice, but the meaning underneath would sting. For example, if I forgot to press his shirt one morning, she would say, "It's okay, dear. Newly married girls need time to learn." If I cooked something slightly different from her style, she would say, "Your effort is nice. Maybe after some practice, you'll get it right." Not harsh, not loud, just quietly belittling. And my husband, he never noticed. Or maybe he pretended not to. Every time I tried to talk to him about it, he would smile softly and say, "Mom doesn't mean anything bad, you're reading too much into it." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to keep peace in the house, so I stopped mentioning it, little by little, day by day, until silence felt like the only option. Before marriage, my car was a small thing I was proud of. I bought it myself after years of saving. It wasn't expensive or fancy, but it was mine. It gave me independence, confidence, and a sense of responsibility. My parents were proud of me. My dad always said, "A car isn't just a vehicle, it's a piece of freedom." He said it the day I brought it home. I remember that, but after marriage, my car became something else entirely. My mother-in-law first brought it up casually during dinner one evening. "Why does she need a car?" she asked gently. "She works close by. Women these days rely too much on these things." My husband nodded without hesitation. "I was thinking the same, Mom." I felt a small discomfort in my stomach, but I stayed quiet. It didn't feel like the right moment to speak up. A week later, she mentioned it again, then almost every few days. "It's expensive to maintain. It's unnecessary. It's not safe for a woman to drive alone. You can take the bus. You can go with your husband. Why do you need so much independence?" And every time, my husband's agreement grew more firm. At first, it felt like a harmless suggestion, then a request, then an expectation, finally a pressure. Their words were soft, their tone was polite, but the meaning was heavy. And slowly, quietly, they made me feel guilty for wanting something that was mine. During all this, I avoided telling my parents anything. I didn't want them to worry. I didn't want them to think I wasn't happy. I wanted them to believe my marriage was peaceful and steady. My dad would call sometimes and ask, "Everything all right?" And I always answered, "Yes, Dad, everything is fine." Even when it was, I adjusted, I compromised, I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. But small things add up. Small losses pile up quietly. And before you realize, the weight becomes too much. One afternoon, after a small disagreement with my mother-in-law about my job hours, she said something that stayed with me. She smiled politely and said, "A woman's car, job, and independence mean nothing if her home is not happy. Focus on the home first." My husband was standing right behind her nodding. Something inside me trembled, not out of anger, but out of a growing sense of loss. That evening, I stared at my car parked outside the house for a long time. It looked lonely. It looked out of place, almost like a symbol of a life I wasn't allowed to have anymore. I didn't decide anything that night. But I felt something inside me shifting. A quiet sadness, a small fracture, a beginning of the realization that my marriage wasn't what I thought it was. And that realization would soon grow into the moment I stood at my parents' door, without my car, without my confidence, and without the life I once believed was mine. Life doesn't fall apart suddenly. Not usually. It happens slowly, quietly, like a soft thread being pulled from the edge of a cloth. You don't notice it at first. You only realize something is wrong when the cloth finally loosens in your hands. That is how the conflict in my marriage began, not with shouting or big fights, but with soft little pressures that grew heavier over time. And the first real pressure was about the car. The conversations in the house became repetitive. Soft voices, sweet smiles, gentle tones. But the meaning under those tones was not gentle at all. My mother-in-law would suggest things as if she was helping me. As if she cared about me more than I cared about myself. "You don't need to drive every day," she would say with a worried face. "It's tiring for a young woman, the roads are dangerous." Sometimes she would add a little laugh as if joking. "You're so timid, driving must be stressful for you, let your husband take care of these things." My husband would quietly agree, seated beside her, pretending he was just being reasonable. "She's right," he would say. "You look tired when you come home from work. You should relax, let go of a few responsibilities." The word he used, let go, sounded so soft, but somehow it felt like giving up a part of myself. I tried to explain once very gently, "I'm not tired because of driving, I'm fine, and the car helps me reach work easily." But my answer never truly reached them. Instead, it became another reason for them to talk. "That's exactly why," my mother-in-law said. "Work shouldn't be your priority, you should focus on the home first." I swallowed my words. I didn't know how to argue without sounding rude, or ungrateful, or disrespectful, so I stayed silent. And my silence became the excuse for the pressure to continue. One morning I woke up and saw my husband and his mother whispering quietly in the kitchen. Their voices were low, but there was something serious in their tone. When I walked in, they stopped talking. My mother-in-law smiled, a practiced smile, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning, dear," she said. "We were just discussing something important for the family." I nodded. I didn't ask more. But later, after breakfast, my husband came to me with a quiet firmness in his voice. "I think we need to talk about your car," he said. My heart tightened, the topic again. "What about it?" I asked softly. He didn't look angry. He wasn't loud. He wasn't harsh. That was the problem. His calmness made it harder to defend myself. "Mom thinks," he said slowly, "that it's better if we give the car to my cousin for now. You don't need it, and he does." I blinked, confused. "Give it to him? Why would we do that?" "It's just for some time," he replied. "You don't drive much, it will be useful for him." "But it's mine," I said quietly. "I bought it with my savings." He sighed as if I was making something difficult. "Why are you being so emotional? We're a family. Things belong to everyone, don't be possessive." Possessive. That word hurt more than I expected, because I wasn't being possessive. I was trying to protect something I had worked hard for, something that gave me a sense of independence, but there was no space in that house for my reasoning. Their minds were already made up. It wasn't just the car. Slowly, quietly, other things started disappearing too. I lost small choices first. What time I woke up. What time I left for work. What time dinner should be prepared, what I should cook. How I should fold clothes. What I should wear for family gatherings. These things sound small, but when someone else decides all of them for you, you start losing pieces of who you are. My mother-in-law had a way of giving instructions that didn't sound like instructions. She would disguise them as advice. "You should wear lighter colors, they make you look calmer." "You should come home earlier. It's not good for a daughter-in-law to stay out too long." "You shouldn't sit too much. A good wife stays active in the house." Every suggestion came with a smile, but every suggestion took something away from me. My husband never defended me, not once. Instead, he would say, "Mom is just giving guidance. She knows better, she's been running this house for years." I began to feel like a visitor in my own life, someone who existed only to adjust, compromise, and accept. One evening, after I came home from work, my husband approached me with a soft but firm voice. "Give me your car keys," he said. "Why?" I asked, taken aback. "I just need them," he replied. "Mom wants to keep them in the cupboard so they don't get lost." My hands trembled slightly as I held the keys. They weren't heavy, yet they felt like the last thing that belonged to me. Still, I gave them, because refusing felt dangerous. not physically but emotionally. The atmosphere of the house changed whenever I resisted something. He took the keys and placed them in his mother's hands. She smiled as if she had achieved something important. Good, she said softly. Now everything is in its proper place. My heart sank, not because of the keys, but because I felt a part of myself slipping away. My husband's behavior changed in a way that was subtle but powerful. He never shouted, he never insulted me, but he slowly became someone who made decisions for me without asking. If I wanted to visit my parents, he would say, maybe another day, Mom needs you here. If I wanted to rest for a while, he would say, don't be lazy. Mom has been working since morning. If I suggested we go out for dinner, he would say, that's unnecessary, Mom already cooked. It was always Mom. His world revolved around her, and I was expected to rotate around both of them. I began to feel invisible. Sometimes I would speak, but no one really heard me. Sometimes I would have an opinion, but it never mattered. Day by day, my voice faded inside that house. I still remember that evening clearly. I was washing dishes after. My mother-in-law was nearby, giving me instructions even though she pretended not to. Wash the edges properly. Don't keep the plates like that. The glass will break if you hold it that way. Her tone wasn't harsh, just steady, firm, unyielding. My husband walked into the kitchen and smiled faintly. Mom, don't tire her, she's still learning. Still learning. I had been married for a year. Still learning. His mother smiled back and said, you're right, she is slow, but she will learn. Slow. The word stung unexpectedly. After finishing the dishes, I went to the bathroom to wash my hands. And there, in the quiet of the closed door, with no one watching, I cried. Not loudly, not desperately, just soft, quiet tears that fell without permission. I cried because I felt alone. I cried because I didn't recognize myself anymore. I cried because I was slowly becoming someone who doubted her worth. I looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection didn't look sad. It looked tired, drained. Like someone who had been trying too hard for too long. That night, I sat on the bed beside my husband. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't notice the redness in my eyes. He simply said, Mom wants you to come home early tomorrow. She needs help in the kitchen. And that was the end of the conversation. My job was one of the few things that still made me feel like myself. It gave me space, structure, purpose. But in that house, my job was seen as a burden. You don't need to work, my mother-in-law said one morning. A woman's place is at home. I tried to stay calm. I like my job, I said softly. It helps me feel independent. She smiled faintly. Independence is not important when you have a husband to depend on. My husband agreed. You should think about leaving the job, he said. Mom will feel better if you're home more. But I enjoy working, I whispered. He didn't get angry. He simply replied, you enjoy it because you don't know what real happiness is yet. Real happiness is serving your family. Something about that sentence broke me. Serving, not contributing, not helping, serving. I began to understand that in their world, a daughter-in-law was not a partner. She was support staff. Still, I kept working. Because if I lost my job, I would lose my last small piece of independence. But my mother-in-law made sure I was reminded of my duties every day. You're late. You should have come home earlier. Why are you tired? You only sit in the office. You're neglecting your home. Slowly, their words began to feel like truth, like I was failing, like I wasn't good enough. One evening, I gathered the courage to talk to my husband alone. I said gently, can we talk? I feel like things are getting difficult for me. He didn't look upset. He didn't look worried. He just looked tired. What now? He asked softly. That what now broke me more than any harsh word could I explain slowly. I feel pressured. I feel like I don't get to make any decisions. I feel he raised his hand slightly. Not to hit me, just to stop me. I don't want to hear this, he said. Mom does everything for this house. You only work a few hours outside. Stop complaining. I swallowed hard. I'm not complaining, I'm just telling you how I feel. Well, stop feeling like that, he said. as if feelings were switches one could turn off. Then he added softly, "If you keep creating problems, things will get worse." Worse. The word echoed in my mind. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay in bed quietly, listening to the calm breathing of the man sleeping beside me, wondering how he could rest so peacefully when I felt like my heart was shrinking a little every day. The real conflict about the car reached its peak one weekend morning. My mother-in-law walked into the living room with a purposeful expression. "Your husband and I have decided," she said gently, "that the car will go to his cousin next week." I blinked. "Next week?" "Yes," she continued. "He needs it more, and you don't drive anymore, it's only wasting space." I opened my mouth to speak but couldn't find the right words. My husband looked at me and said, "This is final." Final. A simple word. Yet it felt like the closing of a door inside me. I felt a dull ache in my chest, not because of the car, but because of what I realized in that moment. Nothing in that house truly belonged to me, not my choices, not my opinions, not even the things I had earned. A few days later, I came home from work and saw the driveway empty. The car was gone. My husband walked toward me with a gentle smile. "We gave it to him today. He was very grateful." I stared at him, waiting for some explanation, some apology, some acknowledgement that something of mine had been taken without my consent. But all he said was, "You should be happy, you're part of a generous family." A generous family. I went into the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at my empty hands. It wasn't just the car, it was everything: my independence, my confidence, my voice, my place in the house, my sense of belonging, all quietly taken. And I let them. Because I thought keeping peace was the same as keeping love. But that day, as I stared at my hands, I realized something important. Peace built on silence is not peace, it is surrender. And surrendering slowly takes away everything you are. Weeks passed and I didn't tell my parents anything. Every time my dad asked, "How are you?" I replied, "I'm fine." Every time my mom said, "You sound tired," I answered, "Just busy." I didn't want to worry them. I didn't want them to feel helpless. I didn't want them to see me as someone who couldn't handle her life. But hiding the truth made the loneliness heavier. It made the sadness deeper. It made the silence stronger. And then the day came when I could no longer hide anything. The day my dad asked that simple, gentle question at the doorway of their home, "Where's your car?" And everything inside me broke. I wish I could say the conflict built slowly. I wish I could say I had time to prepare myself. But life doesn't work like that. Sometimes the moment that changes everything comes quietly, like a soft knock on the door, a single sentence, a look someone gives you, or a truth you're no longer able to hide. For me, it happened on a cloudy morning when the sky looked heavy, like it was carrying secrets of its own. I woke up earlier than usual that day. The birds were still silent, and the house felt unusually cold. Maybe it was the weather, or maybe it was the weight I had been carrying inside for months. My husband was already in the kitchen with his mother. I could hear their voices, low, rushed, tense. Not angry, but discussing something I wasn't meant to hear. When I walked in, both of them immediately stopped talking. His mother looked at me the way she had started to look at me often, as if she had accidentally spilled something expensive and was now trying to hide the stain. My husband managed a small smile. "Sleep okay?" he asked, but I couldn't ignore how his shoulders stiffened. I sat down at the table and noticed something unusual: a file, partly open, lying near him. Not a regular household file. A legal file. Before I could ask, his mother reached over and closed it. I felt a small chill in my chest. I served tea, sat down, and tried to act normal. But something inside me was whispering, something is changing. Later that morning, as I was folding laundry, my phone buzzed. It was my dad. "Come by this evening," he said gently. "Your uncle wants to meet you too." Nothing serious, just come. Something in his voice sounded off. Not worried but careful, as if he was watching where he stepped. When I ended the call, I found my husband standing in the doorway. "Your dad again?" he asked. I nodded. His mother came right behind him. She folded her arms and her lips tightened. "It's not healthy for a married woman to visit her parents so often," she said softly but firmly. I didn't argue. I just returned to the laundry. But a few minutes later, I heard my husband in the next room talking quietly on the phone. He didn't know I was close enough to hear. "She's going to her father's again. No, I can't stop her. We'll do it after she leaves. Yes, today." I froze. "Do what? After I leave? Why today?" My heart started beating slowly, heavily, like it was warning me. Around noon, my husband came to me. "We need one small favor from you," he said, not meeting my eyes. His mother stood behind him, watching me closely. "What is it?" I asked. He cleared his throat. "Since you're going to your dad's place anyway, take this bag with you. Keep it there for a few days." He handed me a simple-looking cloth bag. Nothing seemed unusual, but the way his mother clutched her dupatta made me uneasy. "What's inside?" I asked gently. My husband's smile was thin, just some papers. His mother added quietly, "Family things." Something inside me felt wrong. This wasn't a normal request. Not in our family, not in our culture, not in our relationships. Still, I nodded, because at that stage I was still trying to keep peace. When I left the house to go to my dad's, I walked slowly to the gate, holding the bag. The sky looked darker now, like rain was waiting for permission. I stood in front of our empty driveway, the driveway where my car used to stand. The space looked larger than usual, almost accusing. I remembered the day my husband told me to sell my car. I remembered how his mother said a woman with a car becomes too independent. I remembered the pressure, the guilt, the emotional nudges that felt small at first but grew bigger every day. As I waited for the rickshaw, I felt the first drop of rain on my hand. Cold, trembling, hesitant, just like me. The ride was quiet. The bag sat heavily on my lap. Not because of its weight, but because I didn't understand why I was carrying it. When I reached my parents' street, my dad was already outside. He wasn't smiling like usual. He looked relieved to see me, but also worried. He took the bag from my hands before I even said hello. "What's this?" he asked. I whispered, "I don't know, Dad. They asked me to bring it." He didn't reply. He turned around, walked into the house, and asked me to follow. Inside, my uncle was sitting in the living room. He's the calmest person I know, but his face was serious. My dad placed the bag on the table and opened it carefully. Inside were papers, many papers, layers of them. He took out the first set and looked at them with growing confusion. "These are property papers," he said slowly. My heart dropped. He picked up another stack. "These are bank documents, transfers," another file. "And this looks like some kind of agreement." He read silently for a few seconds. Then he closed his eyes. My uncle leaned forward. "Say it," he said quietly. My dad opened his eyes and looked at me. "These papers, they are putting things in your name, but not to give them to you, to use your name." I felt something cold spread through me. My uncle added, "They're mixing your name with their assets, their accounts. It looks like a shelter arrangement." I didn't understand. "I don't get it," I whispered. My dad spoke softly, choosing every word with care. "They're using your name to protect their things. Something is wrong there, and they want to shift the risk onto you." My breathing felt shallow. "Why would they do that?" I whispered. My dad's voice trembled just a little. "Because they think you won't question them, because they think you're soft, because they think you'll sign anything they ask and you'll keep quiet." He placed a hand on mine. "They're involving you in something without telling you, and they're hiding it behind the word family." The room felt smaller. The air felt tight. Suddenly, I saw everything clearly: the pressure, the manipulation, the way they insisted I stop working, the way they took my car, the way they monitored my calls, the way they kept saying a good wife doesn't interfere in men's matters. It all made sense now. They weren't treating me like family, they were using me. My dad stood up and walked to the window. He looked outside for a long moment. Then he turned toward me. "Where's your car?" he asked quietly, not demanding, not accusing, just heartbroken. My chest tightened so much I could barely breathe. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. He walked closer, his voice trembling. Why haven't you been driving it? Why isn't it outside their house anymore? Tell me the truth. And right there I broke. Something inside me, something I had been holding for months, cracked open. I closed my eyes. Tears slipped out quietly without warning. They pressured me, I whispered. My husband and his mother, they kept saying I didn't need it, that it was unnecessary. They said a good wife doesn't go everywhere alone, they said I should sell it. My dad sat down instantly and held my shaking hands. You sold your own car because they asked you to, he whispered. I nodded. The room went silent, deep, painful silence. My uncle looked away. My dad squeezed my hands tightly, not to stop me from crying, but to keep me from falling apart. I felt small. I felt foolish. But above all, I felt seen for the first time in a long time. It was then, in that moment, that the words I had been swallowing for months finally came out. Dad, I said softly, they have been slowly taking everything away from me, piece by piece, my space, my choices, my comfort, my independence, my voice. My dad's eyes filled with tears. I wiped mine and continued. They told me I didn't need a job. They told me friends caused trouble. They told me to limit visits here. They told me women should depend on their husbands. They told me independence creates distance in marriage. They told me I should be grateful they guide me. My voice broke at the last line. My dad whispered, they weren't guiding you, they were isolating you. I nodded. And now they want to use my name for things I don't understand. He took a long, deep breath. You're not going back tonight, he said softly. My uncle nodded immediately. You stay here, he said. We'll figure everything out first. For the first time in months, I felt safe. Not because the problems were solved. Not because everything was clear. Not because someone else would fix my life, but because I wasn't alone anymore. That evening, my husband called me. At first, I didn't want to answer, but my dad encouraged me to pick up. His voice was sharp. Why are you still at your father's house? Why didn't you come back? Did you give him the bag? I closed my eyes, took a slow breath, and said the one sentence I had never said before. No, I'm staying here tonight. There was a long pause on his end. A long, tense silence. And then he asked, did you open the bag? I didn't answer that question. Instead, I asked my own. Why didn't you tell me what was inside it? His voice grew defensive. My mother and I know what we're doing. You should not interfere in family matters. And that was the sentence, the exact sentence that made everything inside me settle, because I finally understood. I wasn't being treated as a wife, or a daughter-in-law, or even a person who deserved honesty. I was being used, quietly, conveniently, comfortably, and I had allowed it because I believed love meant silence. I believed peace meant not questioning. I believed patience meant acceptance. But that night, for the first time, I didn't believe those things anymore. After the call ended, I sat with my dad and uncle at the dining table. The rain had started outside, soft, steady, comforting. It felt like the sky was finally letting out what it had been holding all day. I looked at the bag on the table. I looked at the stack of papers inside. I looked at my dad sitting beside me, worry in his eyes, and I made a quiet decision. A decision that felt gentle, not rebellious. Steady, not dramatic. Necessary, not emotional. I'm not going back, I whispered. Not forever. Not permanently. Not dramatically. Just not tonight, not like this. Not until I understood the truth. Not until I understood myself. And that simple, soft decision. That quiet moment became the turning point of my life, because for the first time I chose myself. I stayed in my childhood bedroom that night. The room looked almost the same as it had when I was a child. The same curtains, the same bedspread, and the same old wooden dresser that had scratches I had made as a teenager. But I didn't feel like the same person who had once laughed and cried there. I had changed. The quiet erosion of months had left its mark. I sat on the edge of the bed and traced the old carvings on the wood, the ones I had made with a pen when I was bored. They reminded me of a younger me, a stronger me, a me that had confidence, curiosity, and independence. For the first time in months, I thought about the choices I had been forced to make, the compromises that were never really compromises, the silences that weren't really peaceful. I realized how small, almost invisible, my life had become, and I cried quietly again. Not in despair, not in defeat, but in recognition. I cried for the life I had lost, for the voice I had muted, for the strength I had buried. My father knocked softly on the door. He didn't enter immediately. He waited. He always waited. I opened my eyes and saw him standing there quietly. "You've been through a lot," he said softly, sitting beside me. "I'm glad you're here." I leaned my head on his shoulder, and just for a moment I let myself feel safe. Not safe from the world. Not safe from my husband or mother-in-law. Safe in the sense that someone was truly listening. Someone believed me. Someone cared. That night I remembered all the times I had swallowed my feelings. All the times I had said I'm fine when I was not. All the small, quiet moments of compromise that had slowly chipped away at me. I thought about my husband's soft voice saying, "Mom knows best," and my mother-in-law's gentle reminders, "You'll understand when you are older, when you're married longer." I understood now. I understood that their kindness had always had conditions, that their guidance had never been about me. It had been about control. I also remembered moments when I had tried to speak up, small protests I thought were strong, but were always met with gentle resistance. The kind that made me doubt myself. The kind that made me question if my feelings mattered. And I realized that the turning point had not been the day they took my car. It had been the day I finally admitted to myself that my feelings mattered, that my voice mattered, that my life, however quiet or peaceful it seemed to others, was mine to protect. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my father and uncle. The smell of tea and toast filled the room, ordinary, comforting smells. Yet I felt extraordinary, like a weight had lifted from my shoulders. My father looked at me seriously. "You're going to need a plan," he said, "to protect yourself. To reclaim your life slowly, but carefully." I nodded, sipping my tea. I wanted to cry again, but this time it wasn't sadness. It was quiet determination, a decision to think carefully before moving forward. My uncle spoke gently, his voice calm but firm. "They have used your name for things that may be dangerous. You cannot go back tonight. You cannot leave this house without understanding the full situation." I agreed silently. And I realized that standing up doesn't always mean shouting or running. Sometimes it means sitting quietly, gathering strength and planning. Later that morning, I reflected on my husband. I remembered the soft, gentle man I had fallen in love with, the man who once smiled and listened to my smallest worries. But now he had become someone else. Not intentionally cruel, not dramatic, not loud, but silent, calculating, complicit. He allowed his mother to control everything. He allowed her to manipulate situations, and he let my life shrink quietly under her influence. I thought about the conversations we had, the subtle dismissals, the insistence that I didn't understand, that I was too emotional, or that I should adjust. I realized he was not my partner anymore, at least, not in the sense of someone who respects and protects me. As I sat on the sofa, I remembered the small moments that had seemed insignificant at the time, but now felt like warnings I had ignored. The first time he asked me to leave my work early. The first time she criticized my cooking politely, of course. The first time they suggested I leave my car for someone else. The first time I realized my opinion never mattered in household decisions. Each memory felt like a small brick. Alone, harmless. Together, building a wall around me. I realized I had been building that wall with them unknowingly, by staying silent, by adjusting, by believing that peace was more important than my own voice. By mid-morning, the rain outside had grown heavier. It pattered against the window like a slow drum. The room felt warm, safe, and for the first time in months, I felt clarity. I understood three things very clearly. One, I had allowed myself to be used. Two, I had allowed silence to replace my voice. Three, I deserved better. I did not need to rush. I did not need to act recklessly. I only needed to start choosing myself quietly, steadily, firmly. My father and uncle spent the rest of the morning explaining what I needed to know. They showed me the documents in detail. They explained the implications. They told me how to protect myself legally. I listened carefully, taking mental notes, but I also observed the way they watched me. Not like children are watched, not like mistakes are expected, but like someone who is learning to reclaim herself. I realized that for months, no one had truly prepared me to protect my own life. I had been shielded from nothing because I was assumed to be compliant. Now, I was learning to reclaim agency. Later that afternoon, my father and I sat on the veranda. The rain had softened to a drizzle. He held my hand and said, "You are not weak. You were patient. You were careful. But you never surrendered yourself completely, not yet." I felt tears rise again, but this time they were not for fear or sadness. They were for relief, for hope, for recognition. I whispered, I thought love meant keeping peace. I thought adjusting meant being kind. I thought silence was strength. He shook his head gently. Sometimes strength is speaking softly. Sometimes love is protecting yourself. Sometimes peace comes from truth, not compromise. His words felt like sunlight breaking through a storm. Quiet, warm, gentle. That evening, I started thinking about small actions I could take, keeping track of all documents, not letting anyone use my name for anything without clarity, talking to my parents when I needed support, rebuilding my voice even with tiny words, small sentences, everyday assertions. I realized these steps were not dramatic, but they were mine, and that was the most important part. I also realized that for the first time in months I wasn't afraid, not entirely. I felt cautious, yes. I felt emotional, yes. But I also felt power. A quiet, steady, gentle power. That night, as the rain poured steadily, I sat by the window and watched the water stream down the glass. I thought about control. And freedom. I realized freedom is not loud. It doesn't have to be shouted. It doesn't have to be proven to anyone. Freedom is quiet. It is steady. It begins in your heart before it ever shows outside. And I realized that taking back my life would start with small acts of quiet defiance. Not rebellion, not confrontation, just asserting my voice, claiming my choices, rebuilding my life one small decision at a time. By the end of that day, I felt different, not triumphant, not victorious, but awake, aware, and ready. For months, I had been invisible in my own home, used, pressured, controlled, but now I had clarity. I would face my husband and his mother. I would reclaim my car, my voice, my choices, but I would do it calmly, carefully, with the strength that comes from finally understanding the truth. And that quiet decision, that first moment of clarity, was the turning point. The moment I stopped surrendering silently. The moment I decided to reclaim my life one small step at a time. The morning after I decided to stay at my parents' house, I woke up to the gentle light of dawn filtering through the curtains. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and soft. I sat quietly on the edge of the bed, sipping tea and watching the street slowly come alive with sounds of morning birds and distant traffic. It felt peaceful. For the first time in months, I felt an inner calm I hadn't felt in my own home, not because problems had disappeared, not because my husband or his mother had changed, but because I had made a choice for myself. I realized that peace doesn't come from silence or compromise alone. It comes from self-respect, from asserting boundaries, from taking ownership of your life. Over breakfast, my father and uncle sat with me and discussed the next steps. They advised me carefully, ensuring that I understood what could happen if I confronted my husband and mother-in-law. You need to stay calm, my father said. You cannot let emotion dictate your words. You need to explain your feelings. You need to assert yourself gently but firmly. I nodded. I had already realized that shouting or dramatics would not help. But clear, calm words might. And if they didn't, at least I would know I had stood up for myself. My uncle added, "You also need to protect your legal and financial rights. Make sure you know what documents you have signed in the past and do not sign anything today without understanding it fully." That morning, I spent hours reviewing the bag of papers I had brought with me. I noted down what each document was for. I wrote questions in my notebook. I prepared, quietly, carefully, steadily. In the afternoon, my husband called me. At first, I didn't answer. I let it ring, but my father reminded me gently, "Answer him, but calmly. You are going to speak your truth, not argue." When I picked up, his voice was measured as if he were still in control. "Why are you still there?" he asked. "Why didn't you come back?" I took a slow breath and said, "I needed to think, I needed clarity, and I realized I have to speak about my feelings." There was silence. Then he said softly, almost whispering, "Are you upset with me?" I shook my head, though he couldn't see me. "I'm not upset," I said slowly. "I'm aware, and I need to make sure my life isn't being controlled without my knowledge." He didn't respond immediately, and in that silence I felt something shift, not him but me. I felt my voice finally present, not forced, not quieted. Present. Later that evening, my father and I decided it was time to visit my husband's house. Not to argue. Not to yell, but to confront reality gently, firmly, with my voice intact. As we approached, I felt the familiar tightness in my chest. The house looked the same. The same driveway, the same gate, but it didn't feel the same. I carried myself differently now. No longer small, no longer timid, no longer afraid to say what I needed to say. My father placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You are ready," he said softly. I nodded. When we entered, my mother-in-law greeted us as usual with her practiced smile. But something in her eyes faltered slightly when she saw me. "Good evening," I said calmly. "May I speak with my husband alone?" Her smile didn't change, but her eyes shifted toward my father. "Of course," she said softly, retreating to the kitchen. My father stayed near the doorway. "I'll be here if you need me," he whispered. And then, finally, it was just us. I looked at my husband and spoke quietly but firmly. "I need to tell you how I've been feeling." He looked at me calm, neutral. I continued. "For months, I have felt invisible in this house. I have felt like my choices, my voice, my life have belonged to someone else. My car, my work, my independence, they were taken from me gradually, quietly. And I allowed it because I thought that keeping peace was the same as keeping love." I paused, looking at him. I was wrong. Peace built on silence is not peace. It is surrender, and I am no longer willing to surrender my life. His face changed slightly. Not angry, not defensive, but something flickered: surprise, confusion. I thought I was helping you," he said softly, "but I see now you feel controlled." "Yes," I whispered. "Controlled, pressured, manipulated. I am asking you to hear me, to understand me, to treat me as a partner, not someone to manage or guide silently." He was quiet. I waited. I didn't push. I didn't yell. I just let the words hang in the room. My husband finally spoke, his voice steady but quiet. I didn't realize how much you felt this way. I thought I was being reasonable. I thought I was protecting you. I see now that I failed to see your perspective. I am sorry." I felt a small warmth spread in my chest. Not triumph, not victory, but acknowledgement, validation of feelings I had long suppressed. I nodded quietly. "Thank you," I said softly. "Apologies are a start, but change is needed." And for the first time, I felt the possibility of balance. The possibility that my voice could coexist with theirs. The possibility that my life could be my own, even while being part of a family. My mother-in-law, who had been quietly watching from the kitchen, entered the room slowly. Her eyes were guarded, but her voice was calm. "I didn't know, I didn't mean to hurt you," she said softly. Her hands trembled slightly. Her practiced smile had disappeared. I only wanted to help, she continued. But I understand now that my way of helping caused pain. I am sorry, I nodded slowly. Thank you, I said. But from now on, I need my choices respected. My life, my decisions, my work, my car, everything that belongs to me, I need to keep control over them. She exhaled slowly, as if releasing months of tension. I understand, she said finally. And in that moment, I realized that acknowledgement can be as powerful as confrontation. Over the next few days, I began reclaiming small pieces of my life. I contacted the person who had borrowed my car and explained the situation. The car was returned to me, simple as that. But the feeling of control, the feeling of independence restored was immense. I resumed my work with renewed confidence. I spoke up gently but firmly at home whenever decisions were made about my life. I no longer agreed silently. I no longer accepted manipulation masked as advice. Every small action felt like a victory. Every small assertion felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I started having calm, honest conversations with my husband and mother-in-law about boundaries. I need space to make my decisions, I would say softly. Not because I don't value your guidance, but because I need to learn and live for myself too. They listened. Not perfectly, not every time, but enough to see that my voice mattered. And gradually, respect began to build. Small at first, subtle, but tangible. During this time, I spent more time with my parents. I shared my fears, my regrets, and my emotions. I realized that speaking out, even softly, is a form of healing. I also forgave myself for the months I had allowed control to dominate my life. I forgave myself for silence, for compromise, for the belief that love required surrender. I understood now that love requires partnership, equality, and mutual respect. And that forgiveness, both for others and oneself, is the first step toward true healing. Over weeks, the dynamics at home began to shift. I noticed subtle changes. My husband asked my opinion before making decisions. My mother-in-law began asking what I wanted rather than telling me what to do. Conversations became calmer, gentler, more balanced. It was not perfect. Not yet. But the tension that had shadowed my life began to lift, and I began to feel joy again. Not the fleeting, borrowed joy of acceptance, but real joy, the joy of being heard, being respected, being myself. I often think back to the moments in the kitchen, the laundry room, the small silences at home. Those moments were painful, yes, but they taught me something invaluable. Strength is not loud. Strength is not rebellion. Strength is calm. Strength is clarity. Strength is knowing your worth and claiming it quietly but firmly. And that strength became my compass, guiding me in every decision, every interaction, and every step forward. By the time a few months had passed, balance was gradually restored. I had my independence. I had my voice. I had my choices. And I also had my family, husband, mother-in-law, and parents interacting with me as equals, not as controllers or subjects. I realized that confrontation doesn't always need to be explosive. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is gentle. Sometimes it is as simple as choosing yourself calmly, without guilt. Every morning when I leave the house, I feel a little stronger. Every day when I make decisions about my life, I feel a little braver. Every time I speak and I am heard, I feel a little lighter. The car, once a symbol of lost independence, now feels like a symbol of regained strength. My work, my choices, my voice all feel like small victories. And those victories remind me that life is not about perfect moments. It's about quiet, steady reclamation, one choice at a time. I also began preparing for future challenges. I kept records, stayed informed, and slowly rebuilt confidence in managing my personal, legal, and financial matters. I learned that protection and planning are forms of self-respect. I learned that asking for help from parents, friends, or trusted advisors is not weakness, but wisdom. And most importantly, I realized that my life was mine to live, not theirs, not anyone else's. One evening, I sat by the window as the sun set, painting the sky in gentle pink and orange hues. I reflected on the months that had passed, the silences, the pressures, the tears, the doubts. And I realized that everything had led me here, to this quiet strength, to this clarity, to this newfound self-respect. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about confrontation for its own sake. It was about reclaiming my life. And in that quiet reflection, I finally felt at peace. Life doesn't always hand you clarity. Sometimes you must find it quietly, piece by piece. Sometimes you must fight for it calmly, not loudly. I learned that asserting boundaries is not selfish. I learned that asking for respect is not arrogance. I learned that love does not require surrender. And I learned that healing begins when you finally, quietly, choose yourself. The first few days after returning to my parents' home felt surreal. I moved quietly through familiar rooms, each corner reminding me of my childhood. The walls seemed to embrace me, almost apologetically, for the years I had spent away, carrying burdens I didn't need to bear. I sat by the window in the living room for hours, watching the world pass by, people going about their lives, children playing in the street, neighbors greeting each other with smiles. The small, ordinary details felt like a balm to my soul. I had spent months trapped in a fog of manipulation and expectation. Now, even watching people live freely felt like permission for me to breathe, to think, to reclaim myself. My father noticed me sitting quietly. "Thinking?" he asked, smiling gently. I nodded. "I'm thinking about everything, about what's happened and what I need to do next." He didn't say anything. He simply placed a hand on mine, and that gesture alone told me that I was not alone. For the first time in months, I felt that someone was truly on my side, not as a mediator or a negotiator, but as a parent who simply cared. I realized that in the months of pressure and subtle control, I had forgotten how to feel freely. My emotions had been muted, rationed, almost regulated. I had cried silently, smiled carefully, and laughed politely, even when my heart was heavy. At my parents' home, I allowed myself to feel again. I cried openly. I laughed without hesitation. I reminisced about old memories, both joyful and painful, and realized that emotions are not weaknesses. One afternoon, while helping my mother in the kitchen, I spoke aloud about my fears. "I feel like I've been small for too long," I said, my hands shaking as I chopped vegetables. She looked at me with understanding eyes. "You were small, yes," she said softly, "but only because you were forced into it. Now it's time to grow, slowly, steadily." Her words made me feel light, as if a heavy cloak I didn't know I had been wearing had been lifted. After a few days of reflection and emotional recovery, I knew I needed to face my husband and mother-in-law more directly. Not in anger, not in fear, but with clarity and preparation. My father and uncle helped me strategize. We discussed what I would say, how to handle possible reactions, and how to maintain my composure. It wasn't a plan for revenge. It was a plan for self-protection and communication. "We don't want to create conflict," my father said, "but you need to assert yourself. Speak calmly, clearly. Don't be afraid of silence, and don't be afraid of repeating your needs until they understand." I nodded, feeling a mix of nervousness and determination. For the first time, I felt that confrontation could be a tool for growth, not destruction. When we finally returned to my husband's home, the atmosphere was tense. My husband and mother-in-law noticed our arrival immediately. There was a slight pause in the usual rhythm of the house, no chatter, no soft music in the background, just a quiet, watchful stillness. I took a deep breath. "Hello," I said, my voice calm and steady. "May we talk?" They nodded, following me into the living room. I sat down, maintaining eye contact. Not aggressively, not accusingly, but firmly, as someone who had found her voice. I began speaking slowly, carefully. For months, I have felt pressured and controlled. My decisions, my work, my car, and even my time with my family were influenced by you, often without my consent. I allowed it because I believed compromise was love, silence was peace, and patience was strength. I was wrong. My husband looked at me, eyebrows slightly furrowed. I didn't know it felt like that, he said softly. I continued. It didn't feel like love. It felt like control disguised as care. And now I want things to change. I want my voice to matter. I want my choices respected. I want to live without manipulation. My mother-in-law's expression softened slightly, though there was still a flicker of defensiveness. I didn't know, she said quietly. I thought I was helping. I didn't mean to control you. I nodded. I know you didn't intend to hurt me, but intention doesn't erase impact. I need respect and I need boundaries. That is not negotiable. Over the following days, I noticed small but meaningful changes. My husband started asking for my opinions before making decisions. My mother-in-law stopped making offhand comments about my choices and instead asked what I preferred. The subtle tension that had clouded conversations began to lift. I felt heard. I felt respected. These small shifts reminded me that real change doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be quiet. It can be steady. It can be persistent, even in the face of old patterns. I also began reclaiming personal spaces that had been taken from me. My car, once a symbol of freedom that had been diminished, now sat proudly in the driveway. My work hours were restored, and my commitments were respected. Even small decisions, like household purchases or daily routines, were now my choices. Each small victory reinforced my sense of self. I realized that independence isn't only about money or material possessions. It's about the freedom to decide, the freedom to voice concerns, and the freedom to shape your life intentionally. During the evenings, I spent quiet time reflecting on the changes. I wrote in a journal, documenting my thoughts and feelings. I listed the small victories and acknowledged the courage it had taken to speak up. I also reflected on the moments I had allowed silence to dominate my life. Not to dwell on guilt, but to understand patterns so I would never fall into them again. Each reflection strengthened me. Each acknowledgement of courage reinforced the confidence I had begun to build. I often called my father to discuss progress and fears. Remember, he said one day, strength is calm persistence. You don't need confrontation to assert yourself, just clarity, just truth. That is more powerful than any argument. I nodded, holding the phone and letting his words sink in. I realized that strength is subtle. It is not the loudest voice in the room. It is the voice that is steady, consistent, and unwavering even in silence. Over time, I noticed my mother-in-law attempting to bridge gaps. She asked for my advice on small matters. She apologized for the times she had overstepped. She even complimented my work on something I had completed successfully. These gestures were small, almost imperceptible, but they signaled a shift in our relationship. I felt hope that it could evolve into mutual respect, not tension or manipulation. I spent afternoons reconnecting with myself. I read books I had set aside. I took walks without worry about judgment. I pursued hobbies that had been interrupted by months of subtle control. These moments of self-care were healing. I realized that emotional recovery is gradual. It is built on daily acts of assertion, self-compassion, and reflection. Each small action reminded me that I am deserving of a life I can control. Not every day was smooth. Sometimes my husband reverted to old habits. Sometimes my mother-in-law said things she didn't fully realize were controlling. Sometimes old fears crept back. But I had learned a new skill, calm, measured response. I would take a deep breath. I would speak clearly about boundaries. I would assert my choices without aggression. and more often than not, they listened. Even if slowly, even if grudgingly, change was happening, and I felt stronger every day. I realized that marriage isn't about domination or control. It's about partnership. It's about mutual respect. By asserting myself, I didn't destroy the marriage, I strengthened it. I created an environment where my husband could understand me and my mother-in-law could respect my autonomy. And slowly, the home felt lighter. The air felt less heavy. The subtle undercurrent of tension lifted. I began noticing small joys I had forgotten, driving my car freely without guilt or control, finishing a work project and celebrating the achievement, having honest conversations with my husband and mother-in-law, spending undisturbed evenings with my parents. These moments reminded me that life is made up of small victories, and each step toward autonomy is worth celebrating. Months had passed since the turning point. I looked back on the time when I felt small, invisible, and controlled. I reflected on the courage it took to speak up. I reflected on the patience it required to navigate conversations without anger. I reflected on the joy of slowly reclaiming my life. And I realized I was no longer the person who silently allowed control. I was someone who could assert boundaries calmly, someone who could navigate conflict without fear, someone who could live with integrity, independence, and grace. I began planning for the future with a sense of calm confidence, documenting everything important, maintaining healthy communication with my husband, ensuring independence in decisions, finances, and mobility, staying connected with my parents for support. I understood that boundaries are not rigid walls, but flexible protections that allow healthy relationships to flourish. And in this realization, I felt peace. I felt empowered. I felt ready to face whatever life brought next without fear, without compromise of my values. Looking back, I understood that the resolution wasn't about dramatic confrontation. It wasn't about revenge or punishment. It wasn't about asserting dominance or control. It was about quiet reclamation, gentle persistence, speaking truth calmly, rebuilding a life that respects my choices and my voice. I realized that small victories, asserting myself in tiny ways, reclaiming independence, creating boundaries, accumulate into a life that feels whole, peaceful, and balanced. And for the first time in a long while, I felt free, not in a loud or explosive way, but in a steady, quiet, deeply satisfying way. I had learned the power of calm courage, the value of self-respect, and the importance of choosing myself every single day. It was a quiet morning, the kind that feels as though the world is holding its breath just for a moment. I sat on the balcony with a cup of tea, watching the sunlight spill over the trees and the soft breeze ripple through the leaves. For months, mornings had felt heavy, full of tension, fear, and unspoken words. Now the morning felt calm, not because my life was perfect, not because my family had changed completely, but because I had changed. I had learned that peace doesn't come from silence and love doesn't come from surrender. It comes from respect. It comes from understanding. And most importantly, it comes from valuing yourself. I thought about the months that had led me here, the moments of doubt, the feelings of invisibility, the quiet pressure I had endured. Each of those moments had been painful, yes, but they had also been lessons. Lessons in patience, lessons in courage, lessons in knowing my worth. I realized that life often gives you challenges not to break you, but to help you discover strength you didn't know you had. The days I spent questioning myself, the nights I spent crying quietly, the weeks I spent trying to survive under someone else's control, they had all prepared me for this new chapter. And now I could breathe freely. I could speak freely. I could live my life without fear of being silenced. My relationship with my husband had changed in quiet, subtle ways. He now asks my opinion on decisions, not because I demanded it, but because he truly listens. He respects my boundaries, understanding that love is not about control but partnership. Conversations that used to feel tense now feel balanced, even when we disagree. We are not perfect. We have moments of misunderstanding, but we also have moments of respect, of shared laughter, of genuine connection. I realized that sometimes relationships don't need dramatic rescues. They need clarity, honesty, and patience. They need two people willing to listen, truly listen to one another. My mother-in-law, too, began to change not overnight, not magically, but gradually. She learned to step back. She began asking instead of telling, and when she did overstep, she listened and apologized. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And real change, I realized, comes from consistent, gentle effort, not force. Through all of this, I also found a new appreciation for my parents. Their support had been steady and unwavering. They had given me a safe space to think, to cry, and to plan. They reminded me that family can be a source of strength, but only when you are allowed to be yourself. Life started to feel lighter. Driving my car felt like freedom reclaimed. Returning to my work felt like purpose regained. Simple conversations with my husband and in-laws felt like mutual understanding. Even small joys, a quiet morning, a warm cup of tea, laughter over a shared joke felt profound. I realized that happiness doesn't always come in grand gestures. It often comes in small, steady moments when life feels yours again. I also reflected on what I had learned. Speak your truth calmly. Words do not need to be loud to be heard. Set boundaries firmly. Respect starts with clear limits. Value yourself first. Peace and love begin when you honor your own life. Healing is gradual. Recovery from emotional pressure doesn't happen overnight, but step by step. Most importantly, I realized that surrendering yourself for the sake of peace only delays real happiness. Standing up quietly, firmly, and thoughtfully is not rebellion, it is strength. Looking ahead, I felt a quiet optimism. I knew challenges would still come. Life rarely unfolds perfectly. There would be days of tension, moments of doubt, and small conflicts. But now I had confidence. I had clarity. I had the inner strength to handle whatever came without losing myself. And I understood that life's true victories are quiet, subtle, and deeply personal. The victory of reclaiming your voice, your choices, and your independence is profound. It doesn't make headlines, but it changes everything. Sitting on the balcony, I let the morning sun warm my face. I thought about the months of struggle, the tears, the fear, the moments of doubt. I thought about the turning point when I finally spoke up and the long path that followed. I realized that life is not about perfection. It is about courage, clarity, and compassion for yourself and for others. It is about finding peace within and then building relationships that respect that peace. And as I took a deep breath, I felt a profound sense of calm, a sense of hope, a sense that finally I was living my life on my terms, and that I realized is all any of us can hope for. When my dad asked, "Where's your car?" I finally told him the truth, and in telling it, I found my voice, my peace, and the strength to reclaim my life.